So the year 1988, the vibe 100 years before that. It's the grand opening of the Gene Autry Western Heritage Museum, founded by Joanne and Monty Hall and Jackie, and of course, Gene Autry. So 4 people. Originally, it was going to be built in Buena Vista Park, which is that park right when you get off of Buena Vista in Burbank that's across from Forest Lawn.
Is it known as Johnny Carson Park?
No, not that. That's a little bit, if you go left on that, that's Johnny Carson Park. If you go right, that's Buena Vista Park.
I kind of just wanted to say Johnny Carson Park. I kind of knew it wasn't, but okay.
Here's Johnny Carson Park. But the neighbors around there complained so much that it was going to ruin their park that they had to back down. Meanwhile, I've never seen anybody in that park ever. I don't know what they were fighting for. Nobody uses that park.
I parked and ate lunch, but not in the park. I just parked next to the park.
Yeah, and you could have done that next to the Gene Autry Museum. So now they set their sights on the granddaddy of all the parks, Griffith Park.
Yeah, brother.
And of course, the neighbors complained it was going to ruin their park and make too much traffic. The gorillas at the zoo. But they agreed to add 330 parking spaces, and in 1986 the city council approved the lease on that spot of land right across from the zoo at what is now 4700 Western Heritage Way for a 50-year lease for $1 a year. And on November 12th of that year, the groundbreaking on the $34 million museum started. But I'm so cold. Sidebar, I am freezing.
My hands hurt and I'm wearing gloves.
I know. I've had my gloves on the whole time you've been telling the last story, and they're still not warmed up yet, and I'm just shivering. And we've just been told we can't record here anymore. So let's just go inside. Come inside my apartment.
Yeah, come inside my apartment. You can't record here in these 2 spots where no one ever parks.
I will have cut that out of the episode, but one of my landlords walked up to us and said, "You can't record here." And we told them why it makes no difference to anybody that we record here. And they said, "No, you go inside your apartment together and record."
Because you can't park here because nobody parks in these spaces.
So you can't sit here because no one parks here. Anyway, I'm freezing. Let's take one giant bow-legged step back to get to what I am talking about here, partner. What's Western Heritage? What's a cowboy? What's a Gene Autry? I'll start with that one because Gene Autry is up there with Bob Hope and the like as being one of the biggest celebrity forces in Los Angeles ever. So cold.
So cold.
This is very not Wild West. I thought we would be like dusty and wearing chaps when we would be talking about this.
I know. Back in the saddle again. But no, I'm just shivering.
It's funny that you bring up back in the saddle again. We'll get to it. For those of you who aren't 90 years old or were at this museum, like I said, every weekend for most of their life, let's get into it. Partner. Born September 29th, 1907 in Tioga, Texas, was a little cow baby named Orvin Grover Gene Autry. Orvin Grover was his real name.
Gene in quotes?
Gene in quotes.
Okay.
That's a nickname, I guess.
Orvin.
His parents, it gets worse, were Delbert and Elnora Osmond, and you couldn't pay me to pick which of those 2 names was his mom and which was his dad. I have no idea.
Gregory is the wife. What?
It's like the doctor was a woman thing. The Gregory was the wife. So his family was a really old Texas family also. And the way you can prove that is because an Autry actually died at the Alamo.
At the Alamo?
Yeah. You remember?
I cannot remember.
But from a very young age, his family surrounded him in music. His grandpa, who was a preacher, taught him to sing at age 5. And at nights, his mom would teach him hymns and folk songs. So at age 12, he saved up some money baling hay on a farm and bought his very first guitar from the Sears and Roebuck catalog, and he was often
How very
galloping.
cowboy of you.
Yeah, to shop at Sears. Back then, it was a real Sears versus JCPenney situation. By age 15, he was in school plays and was playing his guitar at the cafe in Tioga. But national singing cowboy movie star isn't really a career thought that passes through a farm kid's head from small town Texas. So instead, he ended up working the one thought that does pass through your mind, a telegraph operator for a railroad in Chelsea, Oklahoma.
That'll do.
By the mid to late 20s, working the 4 p.m. to midnight shift every single day. Just I guess they probably had real words by then, but language was developed by then, wasn't it? At one of these sad sounding nights, he was sitting in the office alone with his guitar singing a song when a guy walked in, and Gene freaked out because he knew who this was that walked in, but this man, he just told him to keep playing, so he gave him a little concert. This man was Will Rogers.
Oh my God.
Who was a massive star at that time, and Will Rogers thought Gene was pretty good, which this all sounds like someone's bad family fantasy of like how they made it into the big time. Like, and then Will Rogers walked in while I was working the midnight shift. So he told Gene to try going to New York City, and giving radio a try or go pro as a singer. So he did just that, which is almost beat for beat the beginning of Midnight Cowboy. Almost. And
something missing there.
It was one aspect of his motivation. And in 1929, he auditioned for RCA Victor, but he was trying to appeal to what he thought they wanted. So he was singing like pop hits in his audition. He went up there singing Toxic. And they told him his voice was good, but that style of music didn't really suit him, and he had to figure out his niche. So he went back to Oklahoma and kept singing, but focused more on the songs he grew up with and the songs people were singing around there, which were folksy cowboy country songs, and that just clicked. And in 1929, he appeared on KVOO in Tulsa as Oklahoma's yodeling cowboy. So he was yodeling and telling stories, and after this, suddenly RCA was interested in him. I mean, who would a yodeling cowboy? How can we pass that up? He was a little bit known, and now he had a shtick.
Okay.
He was a singing cowboy, which was always such a weird, like, to me, I always thought, like, what a weird showbiz matchup gimmick thing about a singing cowboy. But apparently it was a real thing, like, in cowboy times. The idea of singing cowboys was around since the 1870s, which were, that's cowboy time. People like to hire cowboys who could sing because on their long rides of herding cattle, they wanted someone with them who could keep things interesting and also help the cows fall asleep at night.
Is that a character in Andy Griffith, or am I making that up?
Singing, I mean, there was probably a singing cowboy.
Oh no, I'm thinking of the W.C. Fields movie.
Probably, but also that was the time of fake singing cowboys.
Yeah, that's true.
But the W.C. Fields trope was also a real thing back in cowboy times.
The W.C. Fields trope is based on W.C. Fields.
It's based on Mr. Magoo. Then once the West started getting tamed and long cattle drives got replaced by slaughter farms, the mythology of the singing cowboy out on the range got romanticized, and it was folded into vaudeville and other traveling shows where they would hire these cowboys to sing in them, and then people who weren't actually cowboys but could sing and pretend to be cowboys while they did it. So that's sort of how the showbiz thing of a singing cowboy started. Then when movies came along, that trope carried over to that, with the first singing cowboy on film being Ken Maynard at Republic Pictures, which is now CBS Radford Studios in Studio City.
Oh, wow.
And the man who replaced him as their stock singing cowboy in their movies, John Wayne.
John Wayne sang?
He was, let me tell you the story of the singing John Wayne. No, he didn't. He couldn't sing, so they dubbed him over.
Oh my
His
God.
singing voice was dubbed over by a guy named Smith Ballou. Because he could act, I guess, and they needed a cowboy to sing. So, he started out as a sort of singing cowboy. So back to Gene. RCA wanted him now. So he did his first record with them, released October 9th, 1929, but ended up switching to ARC because they were smaller and would give him more of their attention, but eventually he ended up at Columbia. These first records of his were a mix of blues, cowboy, hillbilly, country, and yodel, so it was all Americana music. Then from this he was invited onto the National Barn Dance Show on WLS Chicago, and that was it. Now he was a nationally known radio sensation.
On a national level.
Nationwide?
Nationally, he was on a national level now.
This is humiliating. A car just drove by and almost splashed me in a puddle. What is happening to our show?
That's what happens to losers in movies.
This is my Gene Autry origin story.
Being on a podcast is a loser in real life.
Yeah, this is the equivalent of working the midnight shift in a telegraph office. Yeah, oh my God.
Like, why is there so much traffic back here?
All I can hope for is that the podcast equivalent of Will Rogers walks by right now and is like, you guys are pretty good.
Paul F. Tompkins, what are you doing?
Joe Rogan. So he put out more records, but his first hit came in 1931 with That Silver-Haired Daddy of Mine.
Oh, that's the song. I thought you were referring to a person.
Yeah, my dad.
My father.
Recorded with Gene Autry. It sold over 30,000 copies in a month, and by the end of that year, it sold 500,000 copies. So this was huge for ARC, which was his record label at that time, and they wanted to do something special to commemorate it, so they took one of their records and dipped it in gold and gave it to him as a gift, and this was where the tradition of the gold record, when you get 500,000 sales. The first one was given to Gene Autry. Then they had to give him a second gold version of it when it sold 1 million copies.
A double gold.
2 carats. You've probably never heard that song because why would you? But he recorded a ton of songs that you definitely know. He did Back in the Saddle Again. That's
a great song.
That's Gene Gene Autry, Tumble and Tumbleweeds, which is the song from the beginning of the Big Lebowski. Yeah. He did Peter Cottontail in 1950, and then he basically did the Holy Trinity of Christmas songs. In 1947, like we discussed in our episode where we did parades, he did the original Here Comes Santa Claus.
Yeah.
In 1949, he did the original Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which he did not want to do because he thought it was stupid, but his wife convinced him kids would like it, so he did it in one take, and they ended up having to invent platinum records for that because it sold over 2 million copies. They had to dip it in platinum. And then in 1950, he did the original Frosty the Snowman.
Really?
So the big three, it was all Gene Autry. In all, he made 635 recordings. Over 300 of those he either wrote or co-wrote, but a lot of these he actually just bought the copyright from the people who actually wrote it and said he wrote it. With a total, he had 9 gold records and 1 platinum. In doing so, he pretty much set the tone of country music for 2 decades.
Yeah.
And also Frosty the Snowman. He set the tone for snowman-based music for 2 decades. But radio was old news. In the 30s, it was all about movies. It was an obvious decision to put this guy on screen. So in 1934, he made his debut in Old Santa Fe, which was actually a Ken Maynard movie. So he was just cameo, basically, where he sang a song, and little did Ken Maynard know, boy, was he going to be replaced. But then there was also a horse named Tarzan in it, which confused me because I didn't know horses were listed on IMDb, and it just listed starring Ken Maynard and Tarzan, and there was no picture. I'm like, who's Tarzan?
Tarzan beats the cowboy. Tarzan versus Jesse James.
I would love that. His first starring role in a movie was the next year in The Phantom Empire, which was a Western sci-fi, which sounds perfect for me. And he quickly moved up the movie totem pole and was snatched up by Republic Pictures because they had a singing cowboy problem. Ken Maynard was already on his way out and also couldn't really sing that well ever. Yeah. And there was John Wayne, who couldn't sing at all. So the natural replacement was Gene Autry, who was a singing cowboy who could actually sing. He could act fine, but boy, could he sing. And by 1937, he was a huge star doing a new movie. Is churning out of Republic once every 6 weeks.
Jeez.
Was a new Gene Autry movie. And he was getting paid $5,000 a movie. And he was getting hundreds of fan letters a week and became America's favorite singing cowboy, which not a lot of competition. He did have a disagreement with Republic because in the late 30s, he was this huge star, but he was still being paid the same he was when he first got into movies. So he refused to show up to the set of a movie he was shooting, which was called Washington Cowboy. So they had to finish it up with a different actor and renamed it Under Western Stars, and this ended up being the starring debut of his replacement, not only in this movie, but eventually in everything, Roy Rogers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he got kind of his first start from Gene Autry pulling a fit about getting paid. But he was able to work...
Are Roy Rogers and Will Rogers related?
I don't think they are.
Okay.
It's like a Audrey Hepburn and Katharine Hepburn situation.
Right.
It was like
the 2 people only ever with this name.
Yeah.
And Steve Rogers.
And they're
Mr.
both
Rogers.
singing cowboys. Yeah. 2 other singing cowboys from modern times. Stephen Mr.
Mr. Stephen Rogers, yeah.
Stephen Mr. Rogers. He was able to work out these differences in 1938 with Republic, and the Cowboy Factory was reactivated. Gene crafted a whole persona and mythos about his characters, who, by the way, were all called Gene Autry in all of his movies. It was like if Tom Hanks was called Tom Hanks in every single movie. Run, Tom, run.
Houston, this is Tom Hanks. We have a problem.
This is the Polar Express clocking in. Tom Hanks, conductor. Can we get to Christmas Town really quickly?
Hi, I'm Big. I'm Tom Hanks.
I have AIDS. I'm Tom Hanks. He's dying at the end of Saving Private Ryan. I'm Tom Hanks. So to start, he vowed to always, this was Gene Autry's persona he crafted, he vowed to always dress like a cowboy whenever he was in public.
I'm going to need that in writing.
It was written into law if he was ever caught wearing chinos or something, going to the slammer. But he also came up with what he called the Cowboy Code, which were the 10 commandments of cowboy ethics that all of his characters had to follow. Ahem. A cowboy must never shoot first, hit a smaller man or take unfair advantage, never go back on his word or a trust confided in him, always tell the truth, be gentle with children, the elderly, and animals, must not advocate or possess racially or religiously intolerant ideas,
cool,
must help people in distress, must be a good worker, must keep himself clean in thought, speech, action, and personal habits, must respect women, parents, and his nation's laws, and of course, the cowboy is a patriot. Those were the 10 cowboy commandments.
He put racial justice in there. That's pretty neat.
Better than our 10 commandments. He'd do all of this in his signature white hat, and by his side always was his trusty horse, Champion, who was actually many horses. He just kept naming Champion. There was Champion, the world's wonder horse, who could roll over, play dead, and untie knots, who died in 1943 of a heart attack.
Oh, wow.
The idea of a horse having a heart attack is terrifying to me. Lindy Champion, who was born the day of Charles Lindbergh's flight, Champion Jr., Little Champion, Touring Champion, Television Champion, and Champion 3. Those were all of the champions he had.
The Champions Tequila.
Tequila by the champs.
Yeah, Tequila by the Champions.
We are the champions. Together, we are the champions. All of these champions could smile on command, use a hula hoop, and do the Charleston, which is the funniest sentence I've ever written.
That's probably the one, yeah.
And it's just the facts. Early on, his movies weren't very popular in big cities, but they were huge in small towns. And in 1940, Gene Autry was voted by theater distributors as the number 4 box office attraction in the country behind Mickey Rooney,
oh my God,
Clark Gable, and Spencer Tracy.
Which one of you four is a cowboy?
Mickey Rooney! Only if he pretends to be an Asian cowboy. Then in 1941, he was nominated for an Oscar for his song Be Honest With Me. By then, he was making $600,000 a year between his movies, live appearances. He was the first celebrity to endorse a mail order product. Surprise, it was a guitar. And he was also still doing radio during all of this. From 1940 to 56, he had a radio show on CBS called Gene Autry's Melody Ranch. It was put on by P.K. Wrigley, son of the chewing gum freak, who decided to make an entire new radio show for Gene after he saw that Gene went on a trip to Dublin and a crowd of 200,000 people came to see him, which I think is more people than live in Ireland.
Yeah, it is.
It is, trust me.
It is. I was looking up facts about Ireland in whatever year you're in. What are you, like the 40s or 50s?
2016, I think. Gene Autry was on tour in Ireland. This radio show that they made for him, it had drama, comedy, and of course, singing. And then World War II hit, and cowboy music had to be turned into bullets. It's back. The joke is back.
He rode into battle against the Nazis on a horse with a cowboy hat and a lasso.
With a guitar.
Yeah.
Home, home. On air during his show, at the request of the Pentagon, he enlisted in the Air Force to fight the Germans and or Japanese. On air.
So the government reached out to Gene Autry and was like, could you suit up?
Yeah.
Cowboy, saddle up.
And also do this. Yeah. Time to get back in the saddle again. Right? I don't support war. I don't support your imperialist war. So during World War II, Gene Autry was a flight officer with Air Transport Command carrying fuel to Southeast Asia from 1943 to 45. But in 1942, he was still able to do his radio show, only now it was called the Sergeant Gene Autry radio show.
So funny.
Post-war, he was still under the control of the Air Force, but he was assigned to the USO in the South Pacific until 1946.
It's so funny the government treats him like a Barbie, like limited edition.
Hey,
Sergeant Autry.
You sign those papers, you do what you do what the army says you do. Now lasso this Nazi in front of everybody.
This is the part of his career that's similar to Captain America's.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great if like Gene Autry hogtied Hitler at the end of World War II?
Yeah, Goebbels.
And then Elvis came in and pistol whipped him.
Yeah, he gyrated against Himmler.
Against Goebbels?
Yeah.
To death?
He gyrated Himmler to death.
And then Buddy Holly shows up and he plants an American flag on the top of the Reichstag. That's how World War II should have ended.
I agree.
So he was back in the USO, but 1946, he was sent home and it was right back to movies. But by 1950, again, he saw the way the wind was blowing and knew cowboy movies were going away, but cowboy TV shows were just starting.
Yeah.
So he ended up being in 91 episodes of The Gene Autry Show, as well as several other Westerns, TV shows. He ended up retiring from movies for good in 1953 with a total of 93 feature-length movies under his belt.
93.
He's in the Country Music Hall of Fame, the National Cowboy Hall of Fame. He's also the only person to have 5 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, one for radio, records, film, TV, and theatrical performance. But
I forgot that's Gene Autry is not why we came here today. I was so involved in TV cowboys and like, tell me about more TV cowboys, but that's not why. That's
what
not
about
what
Hopalong Cassidy? But that wasn't even close to the end of what Gene Autry did in this city. He may not have been a man of higher education, but he was obsessive about reading newspapers and would read 2 or 3 full newspapers a day.
Damn.
So he knew which way the tumbleweeds were blowing. He had a good sense of public trends, and he also had a good business sense, and he invested the money he was making very well. He started after World War II when he saw that in the time he was in the Air Force and couldn't be performing. He was making, like I said, the year before the war, about $600,000 a year, and during the war, he was making $598,000 $2,000 less a year. So he only made $2,000 because he wasn't making movies.
Yeah.
So he realized that if he wasn't constantly working, which he knew he couldn't do forever, he wouldn't have any money.
Yeah.
So he invested in hotels, owning the Hotel Continental in Hollywood. He invested in a marketing firm. He bought Monogram Ranch in Santa Clarita in 1952, where they would film westerns, and renamed it Melody Ranch. He formed Golden West Broadcasters and started buying up radio and TV stations. He owned KPHO Radio and Cool TV in Phoenix, a radio station in San Francisco and Seattle, and right here in LA he bought KMPC Radio, and in 1964 KTLA. He owned KTLA.
Wow, really?
He also bought the California Angels baseball team in 1960.
I remember that.
In 1960, you remember when he bought it? Remember when the news broke that Gene Autry was buying the Angels? I put down my Nixon pin and I just couldn't believe it. And he was vice president of the American League until he died. So this became his career once his singing cowboy days were done. He compared it to when you're traveling across the open range on a horse, you bring a second horse with you without a saddle. So when your main horse gets too tired of carrying you, instead of stopping to let it rest, just switch saddle to the other horse and keep going. But what about the other horse? It's still tired. He didn't see it as stopping his career. It was just changing horses from showbiz to biz.
Yeah.
So he just kept going. And because of this, he became one of the richest people in California. He was on the Forbes list of the 400 richest Americans for years. And in 1990, he was the only entertainer on that list. But he always said there were three things he always wanted in life: a World Series ring, an Oscar, and a museum. He was never going to get a World Series ring owning the Angels. He missed his chance to win an Oscar, but a museum was literally something he could buy. Yeah. So he figured, let's do that. His dream idea for a museum was one that would showcase and make sense of the history of the American West and how it changed America and the world. But the real driving force behind the museum was his wife. So his first wife had been a woman named Ina, who was the niece of the guy who co-wrote his songs with him. And they met in 1932 and were married for 48 years before she died in 1980. But his second wife was a woman named Jackie. And he met her while she was running a bank in Palm Springs that he was robbing. A cowboy.
I'm a bad cowboy now.
He liked her, but he hadn't asked anyone out in 48 years. So he called her after he met her and invited her to his New Year's Eve party, saying, well, you know, if you have a date, you can bring him too if you want.
I'm into thruples.
I'm adding a new commandment to the cowboy 10 commandment. The 11th commandment, thou shalt thruple if thou art cowboy. She didn't, and they got married in 1981. He was 73 years old and she was 39.
Okay, that's a gap.
That's a big canyon, partner. Jackie also became, he would have been the one in the stagecoach with the 16-year-old.
If he didn't have the commandments, though. And he did.
Only thing. Thank God for those commandments. Gene Autry would have been a monster. Thank God the god of cowboys wrote those on a piece of leather for him. Lightning struck a bunch of cows and it had the commandment.
Yeah, and it made a whipping sound. The thunder made a whipping sound.
Thou shalt respect animals. Jackie also became the only woman to have ever served on the Major League Baseball Executive Council, Oversight Committee, and Board of Directors. Wow. Only woman to do that. So it was Gene's dream, but Jackie and Joanne Hall were the ones that actually set it all in motion and made it happen. They made the connections. They did the fundraising. In February 1987, they had a fundraising event at the Century Plaza Hotel with musical performances by Rosemary Clooney, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and Frank Sinatra.
Wow.
Other cities offered Gene to let him put his museum there, which would have been easier, but he wanted it in the city that had made him, even though it was a little bit trickier. It was worth it to him. And that leads us to back to opening day, November 21st, 1988, a star-studded event for the modern mission/early Western style building. In attendance were Gerald Ford, Roy Rogers, Dale Evans, Willie Nelson, Ed McMahon, Tom Bradley, Glenn Campbell, Charlton Heston, Jimmy Stewart, the fake native guy Iron Eyes Cody from the commercial where he cries when he sees trash. Ronald Reagan, by all accounts, should have been there, but hang on, I'm turning pages with my gloves, but I've got a zinger coming. He got stuck in a pool of jelly beans.
Sucker. What a hero you are for taking down the Reagan administration.
It's about time. And for keeping my gloves on while I did it. They had a bunch of cowboys at the grand opening gallop up to the building on horses and shoot blanks at it. Then they cut the red ribbon with a Bowie knife and they were open for business. The courtyard and the exhibit displays inside were designed by Disney Imagineering because they wanted things to be displayed in a more fun way than other museums, because the museum was part genuine old pioneer Western history with things like cowboy and trapper outfits, an Old West Gatling military gun, a stagecoach from 1855, a notable collection of Western landscape paintings, a wall of sheriff's badges, which is cool, the guns of Teddy Roosevelt, Lummis's old friend, the boxer, Wyatt Earp, Belle Starr, the Dalton Gang, and the Real Wild Bunch, among just a ton of Old West guns.
Yeah, I love that Old West gun section.
It's so cool.
I'm such a nerd for...
I don't love guns, but I love looking at old guns.
I love looking at old six-shooters in that case.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
That's why I brought one today. Let me point it at you. You two aren't sitting here with old six-shooters, are you? Because that's not in the lease. It was, Old West history, but it was also part Western entertainment history. They've got the really early stuff like Buffalo Bill Cody's saddle and Annie Oakley's pistols, but then they have the camera used to film The Squaw Man, which you told me was a derogatory word, by Cecil B. DeMille in 1914, which was the first, that's when the Southwest Museum opened, which is a year after the Natural History Museum, which was the first feature movie ever filmed in Hollywood, which also happened to be a Western. So they have the camera used to film that. You'll love this. Then they've got props from the radio days of Westerns, like the coconuts that they'd use to make horse galloping sound effects. You can't touch them, though. Can't touch this.
You can't touch this.
That's the official policy of the Autry Museum. Then stuff from the TV days of Westerns, like costumes and props from the Lone Ranger, Gunsmoke, the Rifleman, Hopalong Cassidy, and all the toys that went along with all of that stuff. And then more modern Western movie costumes and props from Clark Gable, Gary Cooper, and John Wayne to Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, Clint Eastwood, eventually onto movies like Tombstone, Three Amigos, and Brokeback Mountain. On October 2nd, 1998, it was the end of the trail for Gene Autry himself when he died in his home in Studio City. He's buried at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills, and the ridge behind his home in Fryman Canyon was renamed Gene Autry Ridge.
Do you know where his house is at?
I don't know the exact address, but if you go to Fryman Canyon, you walk by it pretty much, which is, I'll never do that. But did I go on hikes? It would be cool. But the museum is still going strong, and it kind of shifted their focus as the years went on in a really important way.
Yeah.
To start, their collection grew a lot, not just by purchasing things and donations, but in 2002, they merged with the Women of the West, who are a nonprofit that try to highlight the history and impact of women in the American West. And then, like you said, in 2003, they merged with the Southwest Museum. At that point, they changed their name to the Autry National Center of the American West, but then again in 2015 to the Autry Museum of the American West, because Google prioritized museum over national center. So they wanted to optimize their SEO. So their collection became huge, with over 500,000 pieces in the 3,345 square meters of space in the museum itself. But then those other two institutions they have, as well as the Resources Center of the Autry in Burbank, which is basically an extra 100,000 square feet of archive space. As the years have gone on, they've gotten closer and closer to their original mission statement that the Autry brings together the stories of all peoples of the American West, connecting the past with the present to inspire our shared future by making the message in the museum more truthful and inclusive to the Native American side of the story of the American West. A big focus in the museum these days is the flip side of the cowboy mystique, and addresses the inaccuracies in the traditional portrayals of them, and just as much space is dedicated to Native American history and artifacts as it is to pioneer history. And they take very seriously their efforts to reconcile the two sides in the same museum.
And I get that feeling from them too. Last time I was there, I really got the sense that it was like almost a panoramic view of the American West.
Every single part of it. It's the wokest museum in town, Greg. They brought in several Native curators like Joe D. Horsecapture, which is such a great name, from the Neeneen tribe in Montana, and Marshall McKay, who in 2010 they made their first Native American chair of the Board of Trustees. He was the chairman of the Yocha Dihi Winton Nation and was also on the Native American Heritage Commission, the board of the National Museum of the American Indian in D.C., and also an amateur collector of Native artifacts himself. He was considered one of the 5 most important Native leaders responsible for preserving Native culture in the late 20th and 21st centuries, and was really instrumental in the refocusing that we talked about in the Autry. While he worked there until 2016, he died of COVID a month ago.
Wow.
Awful news that came out while I was doing research. I kind of
remember that, yeah.
Another big part of this is their Native Voices program, which came to them in 1999, which is an equity theater hosted out of the Autry and is the only equity theater in the country devoted entirely to new plays by Native Americans. And it's equity, so it's all union pay, and the staff is 100% Native American. They also have tons of lectures, movie screenings, live music, the Masters of the American West program each year, which curates works from 70 modern Western artists. They have the big American Indian Arts Marketplace every November with 200 artists from over 40 tribes selling their work. And this past April, they started asking people to send in their own personal artifacts from during the pandemic, like journals and masks and recipes,
I remember them doing that,
to try to document this new moment in the American West. So they're a museum that's very much alive. And to all that, I say, giddy up. Giddy up, pardon.
Say yeehaw to that.
To all of you, I bid you a yeehaw.